Let me first congratulate and thank Deloitte, as well as my team, for this tremendous effort and the compilation of all this data. But let me tell you why it's so important, and allow me to show you a few slides. So I hope I'm able to manage this here. Please provide me a second, because the question is, why is e-mobility coming in that strongly? And what is the future of e-mobility in India in comparison to probably other countries? So I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, Dr. Damm, we can see your screen.
Great. So these are a few countries who came up already with e-mobility targets to phase out fossil fuel vehicles. And you can see Norway as early as 25. So within the next 4 years, you can't sell any ICV cars any longer there. Here's a projection. What the megatrend e-mobility is all about in numbers. The main issue is everyone predicts that it will become a very significant share soon. And there's a deviation, what is about 2040 or 50. But just let me share you a couple of news from the clipping of the last few months. The UK plans to ban sales of diesel and petrol cars from 2030, which is about 9 years only left to go. GM, General Motors, plan to be carbon neutral by 2040 and aspires to not sell any longer light-duty vehicles by 2035. But consider again in Norway, last year, of all cars newly, let's say, accepted in the transport sector, not the majority, more than half have been electric cars only. And to give you a flavor about what is behind that, Volkswagen alone, the group, intends to spend $86 billion within the next 5 years on electric and autonomous car technology only. So this brings down to about 15 plus billion euros annually. So these are amazing numbers, and you can see what's going to happen. And take, for example, Tesla coming up with their gigafactories, not only in Shanghai, but now in Berlin or close to Berlin, to really scale electric vehicle sales. And this is all driven because carbon neutrality should be achieved by at latest 2050 in the entire EU, in the US, in Japan, in South Korea, by 2060 in Brazil, in China, and so on. And there are many more countries to come. 30 years is not that far. In Germany, let's say historic cars, you can become only after 30 years. So you see how fast this change will happen. And here you can see what's happening with electric cars registration in Germany. So it tripled only last year. And this increase of market share is coming up significantly. But let's share let me share with you 5 key messages. Electric mobility is crucial for sustainable mobility, but it has to be implemented in a holistic approach. That's not only shifting an ICV motor to an electric motor, not only considering where's electricity coming from, but it's the transport formation as well. Electric mobility is more than privately owned cars. And we have to shift the modal split as well. So we need much more public electric transport. Coming to electricity, obviously, the higher the share of renewable energy is in the electricity mix, the bigger the benefits from electric mobility. And I'm glad that India is really pushing that path. Implementing e-mobility requires building new partnerships and alliances. So there are very many surprising new things. For example, consider the real estate sector. Yes, if everyone starts driving an electric vehicle, you need a charging opportunity. And this charging opportunity obviously would be connected to the real estates. So we don't have to think about 1,000 vehicles there, 1,000 vehicles there. We have really to think about transforming the transport sector, becoming carbon neutral. And the core benefits of all are plentiful. It's also the reduction of noise. It's the reduction of energy dependency. It's enhanced economic opportunities. And it's improving significantly air quality, especially if you're talking green electricity. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity for the introduction. I'm really keen on getting some more insight of this splendid work. And whenever you have a question on anything in regards to energy or electric transport, feel free to reach out to us as GIZ. We are happy to work with you and to bring the entire sector forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Damm. Your opening remarks has certainly set the tone for this evening. Now, moving to the most awaited part of this event, I request our chief guest, Mr. Shudhendu Jyoti Sinha, Advisor NITI Aayog, to kindly deliver the keynote address and release the report.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Damm, Mr. Ashish Mandal, Dr. Indradeep Mitra. Let me first congratulate on this occasion of report launch to all the 6 consortium partners and all those who have worked assiduously to come out with this good, insightful report. As expected, this is going to have a kind of status analysis and details about opportunities and challenges and gaps and what are the way forward on the entire spectrum of transport and transformative mobility. What exactly is the status of EVs in India? How exactly do we go forward? Now, let me tell you that as we all understand that EV is going to be a game changer. And in India, as far as NITI Aayog, the place where I am, we are providing all the policy support to all the line ministries so that a full-fledged ecosystem for EV could be created at the earliest so that we get rid of all the negative aspects of the fossil fuels that otherwise is getting into the transport vertical and causing so many problems. Now, this entire ecosystem can be broken into a few dedicated thrust areas that we have identified. Manufacturing is one, demand creation another, research and development activities to be of the world class being third, and as a support, as an enabler to these 3, we have fiscal incentives, regulatory frameworks, and specifications and standardization. I might add 2 more, awareness campaign, because until you are aware, you do not have the choice available. And of course, the urban mind, which becomes a kind of support for the manufacturing thing. Now we are completely dedicated to herald the entire system into a common, connected, congestion-free, convenient kind of transport system, which is clean, charged, and of cutting edge. That is the kind of vision that we have, and the entire government system is working to ensure that this is achieved at the earliest. I'm sure this report will be a kind of, it will provide us a lot of insight, way forward. We on our own side is also connected to almost all the stakeholders. We are having a lot of national, international engagements with the objective to gain the best of the international experiences, to have the best of the narratives, and see that what we could have takeaways from them. So at the end, let me congratulate all those who have worked really, really hard for this particular report, and on this launch occasion, they deserve a lot of praise from all of us. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now to launch the report. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our report status quo analysis of various segments of electric mobility and low carbon passenger road transport in India. The reports are available in the form of executive summary and a full report. So both these reports will be available on the digital library on Green Mobility platform, the DLGM platform. The links are already shared in the chat box, and we request everyone to kindly register on this portal and download the reports. Now, moving on, I would like to thank Mr. Shudendra Jyoti Sinha sir for his kind words and also for releasing the report and reiterating its importance. Now that the report is released, let us know more on the key findings in this report. I would like to invite Mr. Anish Mandal, Director, and Mr. Chandan Dikshit, Manager at Deloitte, to present the key findings from this report.
Thank you everyone, and a very good evening. Thank you, Mr. Sinha and Mr. Damm, for the introduction. Yeah, so it was a good opportunity for us to work on this and actually summarize the overall findings in the form of a report. This report gives you the complete status quo analysis of the various segments of electric mobility and as well as the low carbon passenger kind of a road transport in India. So if you can refer to this report, so whatever is the kind of a progress on the as-is basis, as well as what are the challenges and what are the recommendations, you will find probably a nice narrative in this report itself. So yes, we'll just quickly go through the key findings, and if you have any questions, would be happy to answer on that. Chandan, next slide. Right, so we'll start with a small background. It all started with the countries and India also signing on to the COP21 and then moving on to kind of the overall transition towards the overall transitions toward decarbonization roadmap, what the world has. So what we have seen is almost like it started with Mr. Modi also announcing 175 gigawatt of renewables by 2022. And along with that, there is a huge push towards transitioning towards electric mobility as such, just to reduce the carbon footprints of the country. And transport itself contributes around 13% of India's overall CO2 emissions. So therefore, electrification of the transport segment itself will, of course, hold a lot of potential in terms of the overall roadmap for decarbonization, which the country has. So one of the solutions which was, of course, thought about was to go for public vehicles first, and then have a much more transitioning towards the two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and then probably tackle the passenger vehicles. So that's the way the government has phased out the transition. There have been several policies, there have been several, I would say, initiatives around that. So that we have studied, and also kind of did a extensive stakeholder consultations across the overall stakeholder map, and understood that what exactly are the challenges each of these stakeholders are facing, and accordingly mapped out the recommendations which would be appropriate for the various stakeholders of India to focus on. So that's the little bit of a background what we have today. Yeah, let's go forward. Right. What we see is the overall auto industry has been growing at a CAGR of almost like 1.29%. If you take a last 5-year kind of CAGR, barring FY20 and FY21, FY20 because of the industrial or slump in industrial activities, and FY21 because of COVID. But of course, the sector holds promises. The last quarter has seen, I think, a tremendous amount of sales, and therefore the sector is on the kind of a path to recovery, if I may say that. And we are hopeful that 2021, there will be a strong growth in the auto segment because of the various incentives also launched by the government of India as a budget scheme under the Atmanirbhar, as well as several tax incentives which has been announced. So yes, auto sector is on a strong foothold. And what we see is, though the sector has been growing and though there has been uptake of new cells happening in the segment, but the EV uptake has been a little slow. So it's pretty minimal. As I said, the focus has been more on the kind of transitioning towards the public vehicles and or vehicles towards the public use, and as well as two-wheelers and three-wheelers, where the impact is, of course, much more maximum. So if you see the rough breakup, so almost like maximum uptake has been kind of, sorry. Right, so maximum uptake has been in the three-wheeler segment. So almost 80% of the EVs are constituted by the three-wheelers today, and followed by two-wheelers, which is around 17%, and the rest of it will be the four-wheelers, which is 3%. So yes, there has been several policies also around how to move towards EV. There have been several incentives. So we'll discuss that quickly. Chandan, if you can move to the next slide. Yes, so but means in addition to the EVs, what we have seen is there have been several policies around low carbon technologies as well, announced after 2008. So 2008, when the National Action Plan on Climate Change was launched. So after that, there was a national policy on biofuels, where, of course, there was a target of 20% blending of ethanol and gasoline, and 5% blending of biodiesel with diesel by 2030. So this got revised. Earlier, the targets were so around 5%. So this got revised in 2018 to almost 20% and 5% blending of biodiesel by 2030. Next, we have a fuel standard and efficiency norms. This is each of the mobiles, each of the automobile segments also should have a kind of a standard and efficiency norms for what kind of specific fuel consumption should be. So that was launched in 2015. 2019, there was a launch of National Clean Air Program, which of course was focused on, the entire focus was on reduction of PM 2.5 and PM 10 concentration by 2024. And followed with that, of course, India leapfrogged to BS6 norms from the BS4 in 3 years, which probably the other parts of the world has taken almost 7 years to go there. So that itself is a huge fillip to the India's program for efficient and as well as low carbon technologies as it goes. But as far as, again, as I said, so the EV uptake, what we have seen in the last couple of years has been slow, but the CAGR has been tremendous. It's almost 75% growth in the last few years, what we have seen in the EV uptake. So if we can understand what exactly has kind of happened well and what exactly are some of the gaps which are still there in the system, which needs to be addressed. And what we have done is we have also kind of gone ahead and as well as understood what has exactly happened in the Western world, what could be kind of contextualized in Indian framework and launched as an Indian initiative. So those have also we have outlined in our studies. Yeah, Chandan, next slide. So yes, the study, this is some kind of a unique study which focuses both on the EV segment as well as low carbon technology segment. We have done a complete status quo assessment, which includes the policies, which includes the regulations, which includes what exactly has been the development in the sector, who are the players, what kind of models they have launched, both in the two-wheeler, three-wheeler segments, what kind of models are on the kind of a queue, what kind of assembly lines they have planned. So a complete status quo analysis across all players, across all segments of the EVs and as well as low carbon technologies that has been presented in the report. The details can be accessed, of course, as a part of when you download the report. We have over here just quickly we'll present you some of the key findings on the as-is basis and as well as the key recommendations. So yes, going forward, I'll just quickly highlight the approach what we have taken. So there were three pillars based on which our approach was kind of constructed. So one was review of international best practices. We have almost gone ahead and studied the US and as well as European markets, what exactly has been the policy push, what exactly has been the incentive push in these markets, and vis-a-vis what are the technology enablements that has taken place for the uptake of these EVs or for promotion of EVs that has been highlighted. So any kind of useful references what we have got which could be contextualized in Indian context again has been highlighted. We have done an extensive review of the policy and regulatory landscape in India, what has been done by the states and as well as central across the spectrum, be it related to EVs, be it any kind of policy or regulations in the ancillary segment, which has some kind of indirect repercussion or influence in the EV segment that we have highlighted. And third is, of course, we have done a wide scale stakeholder consultations and surveys as well. So anything meaningful coming out of those surveys that has been also been represented. So the next part of the presentation, we will highlight in 5 buckets. So one is, of course, the study finding related to the key gaps in the FAME2 scheme itself. Based on, again, the findings has been as a mix of what we have done as a research and as well as from the stakeholder consultation. So these two findings put together will highlight the key gaps in the FAME2 scheme. We'll highlight the key gaps in the model concession agreement that has been there and been adopted by various now state transport agencies as well. This finding 3 would be key challenges and barriers on adoption of EVs in some of these segments, not necessarily all the segments, but of course some of the segments are facing issues as well. And then the key barriers in development of EV charging infrastructures, and finally the recommendations for uptake of EVs. So these are the 5 buckets that we'll be quickly going through in the next 15 minutes. So I will request my colleague Chandan to take you through the key findings of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Anish. So we will move to the key study findings across these 5 buckets which we have highlighted. So the first is the key findings in the FAME2 scheme. While it is needless to say that the FAME scheme has been monumental in spearheading the efforts and giving the right push or the right boost for uptake of electric vehicles in the country. However, based on our consultations with stakeholders and our review, we have highlighted key areas which could be relooked or which could be improved in the scheme. And we have highlighted a few of them right here. So the first is that the FAME scheme gives an immense boost to promotion of 4-wheelers and in public transport. However, the subsidy could also be expanded to include the private 4-wheeler segment for large-scale adoption of EVs. Secondly, there is also a requirement of the electric vehicles to have certain localization or indigenized components. However, the key fact is that now currently the domestic market for EVs is not yet developed on the ancillary segment. So this component, although is required, however, this pushes up the price of EVs because currently the market or the local market is not yet developed. There are certain riders or points for the availing subsidy. For instance, in two-wheelers, there is a performance requirement which specifies that, for instance, the two-wheeler has to have a speed of 40 km/h. Naturally, the performance parameters are essential. However, what we understand is that this will obviously, keeping a very high performance requirement, might increase the cost of the vehicles and might sway away those price-sensitive customers, and may actually lead to reduction in sales, which is not the target. Then certain administrative issues which also could be relooked at. For instance, there is a requirement of a periodic or annual recertification which the OEMs have to do, which creates an administrative bottleneck which could be relooked at to make it less frequent. Additional improvements which could be done in this scheme is like provision of a fee-based scheme, which essentially imposes a cess or a penalty in using the IC vehicles, and that could substantially shift the inertia of using IC vehicles to electric vehicles. Additionally, in addition to the demand incentives which are currently being doled out, there could be additional incentives in the form of retrofitment allowances or vehicle scrappage, which could also harness and move this inertia from the IC vehicles to the electric vehicles. So these are some of the broad level feedbacks which we have got from stakeholders, as well as our own internal review of the scheme. Now, moving to what are our key observations in the model concession agreement for electric buses. While the model concession agreements itself is very robust and covers all the aspects which relates to the division of responsibilities between the STU and the operator. However, there are certain provisions which we thought could be relooked at. For instance, the first thing is that the contract tenure, which is specified in the MCA, recommends a contract duration of 16 years, which is typically longer than the life of a typical e-bus, which is almost 8 to 10 years. Now, naturally, this translates to the fact that if such a duration is needed to be maintained, so the operator has to either replace the asset or invest heavily in maintenance, which could push up the cost for the operator and the risk perception. Secondly, the MCA specifies the technical specifications as per the UBS2, which is issued by the concerned line ministry. However, what we understand is that UBS2 covers mostly the internal combustion engine specifications, while there could be a need for more technical clarity on what exactly could be the specifications for the electric counterparts. That could be developed or improved. Also, the MCA requires a mandatory development of charging infrastructure at each maintenance depot. However, what improvement or what further needs to be done is that there could be analysis to understand what could be the appropriate or the optimal locations, so that the operator is free to choose the optimal location which does not jeopardize the utilization or the profitability of the charging infrastructure. Fourth observation is that there is inappropriate. There could be some areas where we saw that there is inappropriate division of responsibilities between the STU and the operator. For instance, the operator is given the task to complete construction of the maintenance depot within 180 days from the appointed date. However, the authority has been given a time period of 1 year for the completion of road. Now, this naturally leads to an inappropriate risk sharing, which could increase the risk perception for the operator. Some other additional observations which we have highlighted here is that as there is a requirement for the authority to put at least 2 months equivalent amount in the escrow account, this could be considered for relaxation because STUs are currently under financial stress, and this requirement could unnecessarily create a financial pressure for the STUs. Few other issues which we already which are pointed out is that there is non-uniformity in the damage liability sharing between the STU and operator. For instance, the STU needs to pay 0.1% of this performance security for any delay in the contract conditions or the conditions precedent, whereas the operator has to pay almost 2.5 times more than the STU. And another key issue here is that the risk of obtaining the entire upstream or the supporting power network from the charging station on the maintenance depot to the distribution network has been placed on the operator. So that could actually increase the risk perception. Whereas what we observed internationally in countries like US, China, so there are a lot of avenues where the distribution company or the authorities actually help in obtaining the clearances and ensuring that the make-ready infrastructure has been given for the operator. So these are some of the few observations which we have on the MCA, and the detailed observations are there in the full-fledged report which we have, which has been made available. Now, based on our review or our international research on how the Western world has ensured that there is a large uptake of EVs and charging infrastructure. So we have highlighted key issues and challenges which needs to be overcome in India so that the uptake of EVs is fastened. So the couple of biggest issues which are currently we are facing in India regarding the promotion of e-mobility or uptake of e-mobility is the high cost of EVs, which is primarily because of the fact that the battery component itself is almost 50% of the overall cost. And currently we are dependent on huge scale imported cells and batteries. That is pushing up the price of EVs. And that is the reason why currently, although we are on track to achieve price parity, yet the EVs and ICE vehicles haven't attained the cost parity. Another biggest limiting point for uptake of EVs is that we don't have a very strong and well robust backbone of charging infrastructure, which is a key for uptake of mobility. Additional issues such as availability of adequate financing support, which is currently acting as a barrier for this capex heavy business. Stringent conditions for availing subsidies, which I've already highlighted. Another issue which was already pointed out in the previous discussions is that lack of public awareness. So currently there is a huge inertia among consumers for using IC vehicles, whereas the performance aspects of electric vehicles, the fact that they're easy to use, the fact that their maintenance costs are less, the fact that the total cost of ownership of EVs is lesser than the conventional ICE vehicles. Those are facts which are currently not very spearheaded or not very known to the public at large. Another thing is that there is currently no large-scale mandate for EV adoption. Like for instance, if we consider example of California or China, so the governments had promoted EVs by specifying specific targets to achieve EVs, as well as specific targets for achieving slow charging as well as fast charging infrastructure. Now those targets were kept as a reference, and funding and activities and pilot projects have been aimed at ensuring that those countries have transition to a high uptake of EVs. So these are some of the issues which are currently being faced in the country regarding promotion uptake of EVs, especially if we consider the charging infrastructure. Again, we already had a look at various countries like US, Europe, China, how they have ensured a rapid uptake of charging infrastructure, and we have understood what could be taken in consideration in India and what could not be taken. So these are the barriers which we have highlighted in currently, which India is facing in the large scale uptake of charging infrastructure. So first is rightly the fact that there is uncertainty about how much of EVs could actually penetrate in India by say 2030. Although there are targets of achieving 30% of sales by 2030, yet there is no large scale mandate placed upon at large. Another issue is obviously the high cost of finance, because charging infrastructure is a capex heavy business, and currently there are lack of robust business models which ensures the adequate payback to the private players. Another important aspect which is a challenge for large scale development of charging infrastructure is currently there is no active participation from the discoms, largely because there is no mandate for them to develop charging infrastructure. Unlike in Western countries or even in China, where we see it, like in California, the discoms are allowed through the California Commission to undertake expenditure in developing charging infrastructure, and that could be recovered through their annual rate filings. In China, similarly, and in Europe also, distribution utilities have also participated in developing charging infrastructure. Now, that is a key limitation currently which we are facing, because discom's technical acumen and the ability is currently not being harnessed. Fourth, currently there is no mechanism for ensuring that whatever cost is incurred in developing of charging infrastructure, whether it could be recovered through the rate filings or not. So that is why currently discoms are shying away from investing in charging infrastructure. Fifth, There is a currently lack of pilots concerning managed charging. So through managed charging, we can actually understand what is the impact of EVs on the grid, and we can actually customize their charging time to ensure that the charging of EVs does not put a tremendous pressure on the grid. So those pilots or demonstration projects are yet not done. That is why there is a lack of clarity on that. Few other challenges which we have highlighted here is that currently, uh, although there are a large number of charging stations which are there in our country, yet their capacity utilization is very low, largely because obviously there are not much EVs on the road, and because since it's a capex heavy business, the payback and the IRRs are limited. Some other issue which I've already highlighted is that currently some states are charging fixed demand charges on the EV tariff. So although the charging utilization is less, yet the operator has to pay those fixed charges. And another key thing is that currently there is a lack of well-developed ancillary services market where EVs or other demand response units can participate and earn additional revenues. Like in countries like US and Europe, aggregators, electric vehicles through the aggregators are participating in the ancillary service markets of the ISOs in the US and the exchange-based markets in Europe. Last but not the least, administrative issues such as identification of land and understanding which are the optimal locations for placement of charging infrastructure. Those naturally lead to a wide-scale need for distribution studies, land requirement studies, and all those things. So these challenges need to be overcome to ensure that we transition to a phase wherein we have a well robust and backbone of a charging infrastructure. Now, keeping these challenges or the issues which we have highlighted, we have presented a concise list of recommendations for uptake of EVs and charging infrastructure, and we have categorized them into policy. The first categorization is the policy recommendations. So firstly, what has been seen internationally and what could be done in the country is that could be a national or a state level policy for incentivizing distribution utilities and investment in charging infrastructure, like how it has been done in California, wherein the Californian Public Utilities Commission actually allows the utilities to undertake their investments and recover the same through their annual rate filings. Charging infrastructure could be mandated. Charging infrastructure program should be launched, and discoms could be mandated to develop charging infrastructure since they have a technical acumen on understanding what impact it could have on the grid. In addition to that, national level policies for city level authorities like urban local bodies or municipalities should also be rolled out, and they should be actively involved in identification of land, deployment of charges, etc. A key instance to cite here is in London, the Transport for London, which is the city level authority. It undertakes annual auctions and awards land parcels to private players for developing charging stations. Last but not the least, on policy, there should be adequate upskilling of upskilling, because currently the auto ancillary segment for IC is developed, so that ancillary segment needs to be developed for EVs as well. So upskilling needs to be done in that segment as well. On the regulatory recommendations, as we have highlighted, that since we have recommended a national policy wherein discoms should be also be involved actively in development of charging infrastructure, so there should be a regulation or a regulatory mechanism by which their investments in charging infrastructure should be recovered through their rate basing of the utility investments. In addition to that, frameworks such as time of the use tariffs, which are prevalent in Europe and US alike, electricity market structures, predominantly demand response markets or ancillary markets, where through aggregators, the EV load can participate in providing demand response and earn additional revenues. Those could also be contemplated to be designed, and currently a lot of progress is being done in the country to transition to a framework of ancillary service market as well. And in addition to that, there should be a need to introduce a gamut of pilot projects on managed charging and introducing EV specific tariffs for public as well as home charging. Few additional recommendations which were highlighted, as we have already covered. Technical studies needs to be done to understand how EVs or their charging could have an impact on the grid, and whether in a country like ours we can actually do a managed charging. We can throttle reduce the speed and increase the speed of EV charging to ensure matching with the demand supply position of the grid. Battery swapping is also a very key business which can hugely raise the economics of the EVs. However, standardization of battery is the key barrier, because if you are going to a place where I am swapping a battery, So the battery has to be standardized across all the OEMs. So that should be taken up also as a parallel activity, so that battery swapping model gains prevalence. And last but not the least, to cite a few more recommendations, electric mobility should be considered as a priority sector by financial institutions. We should develop frameworks for PPP in this sector and franchisee agreements. And last but not the least, a common platform could be created to bring the expertise of utilities, regulators, grid operators, OEMs, network service providers, so that a robust platform is made and we transition to an avenue where electric mobility is uptaken in a large platform. So these are the few recommendations from our side. So this is that would be the presentation, and if you have any comments or questions, you would be happy to address that.
Thank you, Mr. Chandan, and thank you, Mr. Anish Mandal, for that wonderful presentation. I would like to request the audience, if anybody has any question, kindly please type it in the chat box, or you could even raise your hand, and we can let you ask the question to our experts if required.
Then I would have a question to Indodip. What are the next steps in your project and program? What can we expect from NITI Aayog and GIZ?
Thank you, Dr. Damm, for this question. Actually, we are very closely working with NITI Aayog. We do have monthly interaction, and in between that monthly interaction, we also interact over the emails, and we are discussing about multiple things from this project. The immediate upcoming major event will happen in this month only, in February. Our partner, International Transport Forum, ITF, will conduct workshops on transportation modeling related aspects. And afterwards, in March, WRI, our another partner, will also have the stakeholders platform establishment. These two are major pillars of our India component. We would like to have another workshop about transportation modeling that will be done in April. In the meantime, we have started with a couple of initiatives, for instance, with the managed or smart charging. That's an international consortium led by Fraunhofer Institute from Germany, along with them, Danish Technical University, and also University of Commerce from Madrid and IIT in Bombay. Together, we also have another project started. This is also about global review of charging infrastructure. In that project is being led by IIT Bombay. With them, there are other partners like Florence School of Regulation, also Danish Technical University and University of Commerce. Such initiatives will take time, but it's very thrilling. So therefore, lots of exciting things ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have one question in our chat box from Jörg Gabler. So he is asking if we could elaborate on a business model that we are aware of for charging infrastructure, but need not be limited to India. Mr. Anish, would you like to answer this question?
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So there could be couple of business models around that. First of all, one is it's not necessarily as what's been followed globally and as well as in India. So it could be a unique combination of both. So over here, there are two options. So one is, of course, the regulator comes out with a framework where, say, a national tariff policy. Right now, what's being drafted, as I have heard. So if that could mandate the regulators coming out with a framework and rate basing of the EV charging infrastructure, then of course there makes a sense that the distribution utilities are providing that charge ready kind of infrastructure, and somebody else comes in and puts up a shop there. So that could be a business model by itself. So basically a private operator comes in more from the perspective of operate, inverted comma. So I kind of set up my shop and as well as operate the infrastructure on behalf of the utility itself or on behalf of the. So that could be one such kind of a business model, which is probably should be the kind of a model which we are looking at. There could be lease models as well, which is again operate model in a way that whoever owns the land or whoever owns the land person or whatever I'm saying infrastructure basis. So he leased it out on the basis of that and then provides a kind of a service. There could be others which is like a pure play market model, which is as a say for example players like Fortum or something like that scans for their own retail places, scans for their own land infrastructure, and sets up their shop, and then completely the income or whatever the revenue is yielding from that particular charging infrastructure could be of course without any regulations. So there are a couple of business models there. My colleague Sumit Mishra is also there. He's the director with the transport practice. I will request Sumit also to pitch in with some of the business models you have launched. Sumit, are you there?
Yeah. Thanks, Nish. So I think you have covered most of the options. So here the current, the challenge is the traffic. So initially in next 2-3 years, there will be challenge related to traffic, especially when for the charging infrastructure operator. So there, I think some of the components, some of the sweetener needs to be added. So lease is one option, and probably some of the space can be provided and some advertisement right can be given to the charging station operators, so that till the traffic builds up, he can the operator can generate revenue from other sources, from advertisement or any commercial activities. So those kind of arrangement should be part of the concession agreement, at least initially in 3-4 years.
Thank you, Mr. Sumit. I hope that has answered the question. We have Mr. Saurabh Rohila, who's raised his hand. Dr. Damm, would you like to? Yeah.
Yes, let me add
please.
another angle to this question. I'm not aware about any profitable business model worldwide where selling electricity via a new setup charging station is profitable. But on the other hand, if you are an existing discomp, and I did this for Leipzig for a couple of years as well, and you just sell additional electricity during off-peak hours, it's a marvelous business model. So you have to see it a little bit more holistic. So if you can make a business around the charging as such, or if you profit from selling that electricity outside of peak hours and add something to it and have some benefits, for example, as a discom, then there are multiple opportunities. And something what is being used in some European countries is using it as an advertising environment too. And you have to be aware that those charging places you get and you grasp will be there for a whole number of years. And this is one of the business, the first one will get the business. So if that's prime spot in front of a museum, along a, let's say, cinema or a shopping mall is being occupied by your, let's say, competitors, you're out of that business for charging for the next 10 years plus. So you better think of moving into that area now and capture this, well, first mover benefits. So it's quite an exciting industry as far as I'm concerned. But yes, there's no obvious business plan as such, just selling the electricity from a newly set up charging station as far as I'm concerned. But I'm happy for any discussion. Thanks for allowing me the input.
Thank you, Dr. Damm.
I'd just like to add, yeah, so So in Europe, as Dr. Damm also correctly highlighted, so almost 30% of the charging infrastructure is owned by the utilities themselves. So it's kind of a forward integration for their demand creation. Secondly, there are several charging stations being owned by the vehicle OEMs. So they see it as a cross subsidization, and they will probably increase their cells in the automobile segment because of the charging infrastructure they provide. So yes, there are various market models which will of course evolve, and not necessarily the charging infrastructure will give you the revenue, but there could be other avenues through which you are generating that revenue. So there are business models which EESL is also, for example, evaluating, like more from a financing perspective. So as rightly pointed out by Chandan also in his presentation, the financing seems to be an issue, and therefore whoever comes out with a cheaper finance availability and can probably set up the shops and provide the capex and appoint somebody else to operate that in an operate model. So that's what I'm saying. So it's kind of an alliance role. So you do several alliances, you do several models, but at the end of the day, somebody takes a financing role, somebody takes an operator role, and somebody takes a supply role.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manish. Can we have Mr. Saurabh Rohila? Could you please go ahead with your question, because I see that you had raised your hand much before.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Sahana. This is Saurabh Rohila from SIAM. First of all, thanks for inviting us for this launch of report. My quick question is to Chandan Dixit. I think he in one of these slides, in the initial slides, he talked about the gaps in the FAME 2 which have been observed. I think one of the gaps which is highlighted is that the two-wheelers have been applied with certain performance criteria to qualify under FAME 2. So my question, or rather my observation, is that in the FAME phase 1, low speed two-wheelers were getting sold, and to our understanding that low speed two-wheelers apparently are not able to replace the existing petrol two-wheelers what we have. So if we have to look at a future where we kind of replace petrol two-wheelers through electric two-wheelers, the only way which will be possible is to have a comparative electric two-wheelers. Although because of those performance criteria, the sales have come down, but I think it will probably see a hockey stick kind of curve. And eventually, if you have a right policy push, a lot of major two-wheeler manufacturers and regular two-wheeler manufacturers will come in this area, which we already see happening as we speak. So what's your point of view on that, Mr. Chandan?
Right, sir. So as you have rightly said, sir, so that was the rationale for why those performance requirements were specified. So what the limited feedback, again, which we have got from stakeholders and as well as with discussion from them. So what is happening is that the performance requirements which are currently there, so that is obviously going to lead to a position where the cost of those two-wheelers might increase. And the issue, the limited observation in that was that now once the cost of those two-wheelers increases, that could actually may happen that it could disincentivize or sway the price-sensitive customers. So now that the sales will may go down because of if those price-sensitive customers do not resort to purchasing those two-wheelers because of those performance requirements. So the sales may not be there, and that is why the demand incentives could not be doled out, and that naturally becomes a vicious cycle. Another thing which we also pointed out, sir, now there is a requirement of indigenization of components also, which is in the long run is needed. Currently, what is happening is that the ancillary market and the component market is developing. Now, for now, what is happening is that to achieve that indigenization, that is the cost of those two-wheelers are going up, because currently the market is limited, and that is going to the limited effect which is going to have is that it may sway the price-sensitive customers. But as we have rightly pointed out, sir, in the long run, obviously due to market supply dynamics, it is going to be self-correcting, and we might see more offtake of two-wheelers in that.
Thank you, Mr. Chandan. Next, I think we will just allow for one more question, one last question, because we might overshoot the time otherwise. So, Mr. Uh, Kirit Parikh, if I'm right in pronouncing the name, so could you please go ahead with your question? Sorry, but I think he is not available. All right, I will pick out one interesting question that I found with in our chat box. Okay, so this is from Rishi Kotari, World Bank. A lot of charging infrastructure needs will be driven by the market segments: two-wheeler, three-wheeler, freight, passenger, or personal. Does the report look at these market segments and accordingly the charging needs in greater detail? Mr. Anish, if you could respond to that query.
Yes, of course. The report, of course, analyzes that. So I think EVs as such, of course, it's segmented market, as I said. Even that 0.5% of what we have today is within that 80% is three-wheelers and then 17% is two-wheelers. So of course, your question is valid. So it's not a general blanket statement that you increase your charging infrastructure and therefore the uptake of your EVs will happen. But of course, there is a segmented strategy which needs to come up. But having said that, there are the needs of the charging infrastructure is quite different when you move from one segment to another. The bike or the two-wheeler segment, of course, the need is quite limited because most of the technologies which have been now designed and international patents have been filed also, they are moving towards a very flexible kind of a battery size which you can just remove and charge it at your home kind of sit. So I don't see it as a challenge in terms of two-wheeler segment. Three-wheeler, of course, the charging infrastructure will be a need, and therefore batteries. We are seeing various market models around that. Battery swapping is definitely one such, of course, business model, or I would say a different type of a business model, not the usual one. But that's also evolving around the three-wheeler segment. Buses will, of course, have a battery swapping much more, and therefore there are limited, I would say, stations available or charging places available where you can charge buses or charging stations. So each segment has its different challenges and each segment has its different opportunities. The report, of course, outlines each of these and also comes out with specific recommendations around each segment.
Thank you, Mr. Anish. I think we will have to close the question and answer session here. Given that we have to keep up with our time limit. Thank you for everyone who have posted the questions, and kindly please do not be disappointed if you did not get the opportunity to ask the question. You can put it in the chat box. We are making a note of all the questions, and in case there is a later, we can circulate answers to these questions also. Moving ahead, to end this evening on a note with gratitude, I request Dr. Indrajit Mitra, Coordinator for India Component of NDC-TIA project, to kindly share the closing remarks.
Thank you, Sahana. Good evening, everyone. I, on behalf of NDC-TIA Project India Component, extend very happy thanks to all of the participants and the speakers of this event. I hope that the study report will serve as a good compendium of information on a wider spectrum of the ecosystem of low carbon transport in India, but particular focus was given to electric mobility systems. It's an honor to have with us Mr. Sinha, the advisor from NITI Aayog today. His wise words really enlightened us. I would like to also express my heartfelt gratitude to NITI Aayog team, Mr. Siddharth Sinha, Mr. Divakar Mittal, Mr. Madhav Sharma, and Mr. Vijay Kumarji for providing their constant support throughout not only this study, but in addition to that, throughout the whole NDC-TIA project so far, almost 1 year. I'd like to also say sincere thanks to Dr. Winfried Damm for his short presentation, but also very enlightful comments. So I would not like to spend much time on the summary of the points discussed today because we are short of time now. I would like to thank Deloitte team for carrying out that study and developing this report. They had really worked very hard for that. So it's not only Mr. Anish and Mr. Chandan, but his entire team. Now, I would like to also thank the NDC-TIA consortium partners. Active advice and review process were done through them. Mr. Amit from WRI, Dr. Anup from ICCT, Mr. Pierre Paolo from International Transport Forum, all went through that report and gave the review comments. So I'd like to thank them, all of them. I'd like to say that BMU or ICI, International Climate Initiative of BMU, gave us the opportunity for us to working for this exciting theme. So for this study and also for this event organization, I thank our own colleagues, Mr. Sudhanshu Mishra, Mrs. Shweta Kalia, Mrs. Sahana. The thing is that we have now great challenges, but also the great opportunities before us in transitioning from the conventional vehicle to the greener type vehicles. So kindly stay in touch and cooperate with the NDC-TIA project in this process to support India. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, sir. With this, we come to the end of this event. On behalf of GIZ and the entire NDC-TIA family, I take this opportunity to thank each one of you for taking time out for this e-launch event. You may access the full report and the executive summary from the digital library on Green Mobility website. The links are already posted in the chat box. And thank you once again. I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.